Hello everyone. In the last video I dismantled the high-speed vertical head for my milling machine. As you can see here, this nut that held the pulleys in position did not want to leave home. It was more difficult to remove than a mobile phone from my son's hand. But in the end it gave up and the shaft it held in fell out. Donk. Now of course the next job is to make a new nut. Making a blank for the new nut was covered in the last video. You can see me going on about it just here. I do have a problem though. My lathe is missing some of the change gears, so at the moment it's unable to cut a 16 TPI thread, and of course 16 TPI is the thread of the nut we need to make. However, all is not lost. I have a friend who has a CNC lathe, and that lathe can cut 16 TPI threads. So it's to his workshop we go now. Here we are at Toolpath Techniques. The town is Lichborough in Northamptonshire. The owner and chief bottle washer is Terry Skuse, an old mate of mine. This is an image of the back of his head, and this one of the front. These are our two nut blanks. The first one is placed in the chuck of the lathe and set up so the front surface is nice and square to the tool post. Next, the centre hole needs to be opened up to the correct diameter for our thread. We use the boring bar for this cut. And now the CNC bit of the lathe takes over. The chuck is rotating clockwise, looking at it from the tool post. The cutting tool is upside down and it cuts as it enters the job from the right. This will produce a left-hand thread in the job. The feeds have been set so that the thread produced is 16 TPI. The angle of the cutting tool is 55 degrees and this will produce a Whitworth thread form. We've checked the fit of the shaft into our nut several times as we get closer to the correct size. This is the last check and it's shown at double speed. Woohoo! The thread is cut and the fit is good. I now deburr the ends of the thread and the nuts are finished. We're now back in familiar territory. We're back in my workshop. I have the two nuts here that we made whilst we was over in Terry's workshop, and what I'm going to do is bring you in closer and then you can see the standard of the thread that the lathe has cut. And this is one of the nuts, and you can see that the thread itself is really quite nice. There's no chatter marks on there at all and it's looking really quite nice. It's now time to start reassembling the high-speed vertical head. We're going to start with this casting here, which is the main casting of the vertical head. Now the first thing that needs to be assembled is this large circlip here. Circlip goes in and then that acts as a stop when we put the bottom bearing in. So we're going to start off with this large circlip. So we tighten up the pliers, squeeze the circlip ends together, and now in it goes down to the slot that it fits in, and there we go. Before I insert the bearings, I'm going to heat the body of the head. Hopefully the cast iron will expand and allow the cooler bearings to slide in easier. The temperature of the head at the moment is 23 degrees C. 76 degrees. So we will try one of the bearings in there, the bottom bearing. Now first of all I'm going to just lubricate the surface with a little bit of the same grease that's gone into the bearings. Oh, tell you what, it's hot. Okay, the bottom bearing is this one here, and that's the right way up. So this hopefully will fit into the hole like that, but it's not falling down nicely like I hoped, so I think we'll just tap it out of there. You may remember this tool. I made this to extract the bearings when we first took the head apart. Well, we can use the same tool for putting the bearings back in again. Now I've wiped the same grease around the outside of the bearing here. Just put it into the hole like that. Pull this up through the centre. Now on with our pressure plate. I've wiped all these down so there isn't any dirt or muck on them. Now the bearing started dropping on one side, so I'm just tapping the opposite side. This is the high side, to get it the same level all the way around, which I think is just there. So let's try that again. And now I can feel it going down quite nicely. Right, that's gone solid. And as you can see, the bottom bearing has gone right down to the circlip. So we have the first bearing, the bottom bearing in place. We can now put in the two spacers, which are here. So I'll just give them a wipe, and also a little covering of grease. So that's the first spacer. I've also marked on there which way it came out, so that way is up. This is the top of the head, so the outside spacer goes in first, there, and now the second inner spacer there, and now a little bit of grease on this one as well. And again, I've got top written on this top surface here, so this goes between the bearings like that. The next bearing is here under this cover, so that's there. The top is this surface here, so I put that just there, and that's going in really quite nicely. And this will go down until it hits the top of the spacer, which is just there. I'll give it a little bit more effort. Right, let's loosen it off, and that should be the bearings in position. This flat nut screws down inside the housing of the high-speed head, and it goes down on top of the outer race of the bearings, just here on that land around there, and pushes the bearings home. So this pushes the bearings against that large circlip down the bottom. It has a hole in its side just here, and that hole is for a grease nipple to go in. The grease goes through the grease nipple, and it comes out in those two holes there, which force grease into the two felt sills which fit in here. But it comes through to this hole here, which injects grease into the top bearing of the high-speed head. They're all cleaned out at the moment, so there's no grease in. I'm going to put a little bit of grease in and grease these felts before this goes in. Right, I'm just about to screw this in place to hold the top bearing in, and it's dawned on me that the grease nipple is quite proud here, and that's going to fail on the mounting plate for the motor, which fits on first. So I'm going to have to put the mounting plate in position first, and that mounting plate is just here. It's all nice and clean. There is a pin coming out of the head just at the back here. That pin locates into that hole just there. So we put this on, and down it goes. That's in place. The next thing to go on is the securing nut for this plate, which is here. Now I've already put some anti-seize compound around here. It's copperies, and I've put that on the thread as well. So we just need to get the thread, sort it out, and then screw that down so it holds the motor mounting plate in place. Okay, now I need the pin spanner to tighten this ring up, so I can insert them into the holes and now slowly do this ring up, and it's blocked out there. It doesn't have to be that tight. It was almost finger tight when I took it off. So I'm just going to tap it a few times with my hand like this, and that should be tight enough to hold that motor plate in position. And now it's time to fit the top nut onto the head. You remember inside here there's two felt rings which I've filled with grease and placed in there. I've greased up the holes that go from the grease nipple into there, and also the hole that comes out and supplies grease to the top bearing here. So all I need to do now is put this on the head and find the start of the thread. just there. And now we turn this clockwise till there. Now this nut was loose when we first took it off, and there we go. That should be tight enough for that. So that's the bearing retaining nut in position as well. Now the next part to go in is this. This is the top part of the quill. It's the shaft that runs through the two top bearings here, and the pulley block sits on top of that. I've greased the surface of this. I've greased the inside of the bearings, but also I've loosened this top nut. The reason I did that is between the two bearings there are the spacers. Now the inner spacer is quite tight on this, and it wasn't lined up properly, so I've loosened the nut off. So as I put this in, that should allow the spacer to move and everything line up. So I can just put this in here. That's gone into the bottom bearing. I now tap it in with a mallet and a piece of wood like this. And we should hear the note change. There it is. So the shaft has gone all the way in and has now butted up against the first bearing. Now if we do this flat nut up again, right, I've moved the head around in the vise now, so we have the shaft pointing upwards. Before we put the pulley block on, what we're going to do is put the keyway back in its slot, and the key is just there. Just tap it in, make sure that it's in all the way, like that. You don't want to tap keys with metal hammers because the keys are normally quite soft, and you don't want to spread them out on this top surface, because then the pulley may not fit on very nicely. So we've got the keyway here for the pulley. I've put grease on the inside here, also on the shaft and around on the pin, and now all I need to do is line everything up like that and push it on. Ta-da! Like that. The last thing to go on is the nut that we made. So I've just smeared some anti-seize compound on the thread of the shaft, also the thread of the nut. We've got to remember that this is a left-hand thread nut, so we've got to do it up, turning it in a anti-clockwise direction like that. Now once we get this down to the pulley, which is just there, we now need to tighten it up. But that can wait until we get the quill assembled and put in the bottom of the head, because it'll be easier to hold everything together and then tighten it at that point. These are all the parts for the lower end of the quill. Everything has been cleaned and it's all ready to go back again. Both the bearings have been washed out, and I've refilled them with the Silcoline grease, which is the same grease as I used on the other bearings. The Pro RG2 grease is its name. Now when I say I've filled the bearings, I've put in round about 30% of the space around the bores, so there is space in there. You mustn't fill these bearings right up to the top, so it's round about 30% fill. Right, let's start putting it back together. The lower part of the quill is now completely assembled and it went together very nicely. This is now ready to slide inside the main casting of the high-speed vertical head, and we'll be doing that next. Once that is in place, then we will assemble the last pieces that you see here, and that will finish off the high-speed vertical head. I've wiped everything out on the inside so there's no mess on there at all, no contamination. I have greased the top half of the lower quill and also the shaft of the quill itself. I'll be greasing the bottom half once I get this top half in. Now what I need to do is line up the key here against the keyway down there. So I'll bring this in and turn it round until the key's at the bottom, like this. I've now applied a little bit more grease to this surface here, so we should be able to push the lower quill right in now, like that. I've now turned the head around in the vise and we've got the pulleys at this end. The next job is to tighten our new nut. This is the left hand threaded nut. Push that shaft back like that. You notice that the lower quill has come out. Now, to stop the shaft rotating, I'm going to be using this pin spanner. This is the one that we made right at the beginning when we were taking the head apart. This will go into the bottom of the shaft just here, and we'll lock the shaft there. This pin spanner will go into the nut just there. And now I can put a bit of effort into it and then tighten that. So I've just got to bring my body in to hold that, so I don't want the pins jumping out. And it's now tight. So that's the nut tightened onto the top of the pulley. The next thing to go in is the drawbar that goes down through the centre of the quill here. Now I want this to move nice and easily, so I haven't put any grease on this. I've just used 3-in-1 mineral oil, and that fits nicely in here, and that will stay nice and loose. I've put a little bit of anti-seize compound on the thread and also on the thread of here of this flat nut, and I can screw that on. This is a right hand thread, and I'll be tightening this with the pin spanner that I made when we took it apart. So that will go in here. So this is going to fit at the other end. Now I can hold the shaft and then tighten the nut just like that. This is the next piece to be assembled into the head. This is the quill operating shaft. This fits down this hole here. You'll notice that in the center section there is a pinion gear machined, and that engages into a rack gear which is machined on the side of the quill. Now the other thing which is important about this is it has a woodruff key fitted at the top here. That's pushed into place, and I'll be showing you where that fits later on. The thing to remember about it is when we assemble this shaft into this hole, the pinion gear will engage with the rack on the side of the quill, but it needs to engage in such a position that the woodruff key is pointing to the top of the head, and that will give one of these flats level with the bottom of the head. So we need to insert this through the hole here, push it up and then twist it at the same time to engage the pinion into the gear, just like that. Now to hold that up, if I took my hand away, that would fall down now. So what I'm going to do is hold it into position with a little bungee strap. This will go around the bottom of the shaft here, that little square shaft, and then I can take it over the head and clip it onto the top. Right, that has the shaft in position. Right, the next piece to go on is this. This is the return spring for the quill and the return spring barrel. Now this is going to slide straight on the top there. Just a note about the woodruff key position. I said it needed to point straight upwards. That's not actually true. When you put these together, depending on the position of where the pinion gear has been cut, this will be slightly off, so it doesn't have to be exactly pointing out. This one is actually coming over about, I suppose, about 5 degrees in this direction. Anyway, it needs to be at the top somewhere around here. Now this goes on with the end of the spring pointing towards the keyway. So this slides on and pushes into the head like this. Whoops. The next piece to go on is the cover that sits on top of the spring. Now this cover has a boss in the centre with a slot out of each side. I'll bring up a close-up of this. You notice that this slot has it's got the slot going right the way through, but it also has the keyway for the woodruff key, where the one on the other side only has a slot and it hasn't got the slot for the woodruff key. Now there must be several ways of putting this together, but the best way that I've found is I have lined up the woodruff key on this shaft with the end of the spring. Now I'll show you a little picture of that. Right, so the next thing that I'm going to do is push the shaft down so the woodruff key that's in the top of that shaft goes down below the bottom of the spring barrel here. So you can see it's just going down now. Right, now I pick up the cap. Remember that the woodruff key is on one side and there's just a slot on the other. Well, the one that is just a slot I'm going to put at the top, and I'm going to push it down so the end of the spring actually goes into it. Now that puts the woodruff key slot 180 degrees away from the actual woodruff key, and I'll show you why in just a moment. So we push it on like this. I'm just twisting it slightly until the spring goes into the gap, which it's done just there. The next thing we need to do is lock the spring barrel to the casting of the head, and that is achieved by screwing up this little grub screw here. So we need to put the Allen key in, turn it round, and that Allen key has a sharp point to it, which is digging into the shaft of the spring barrel. So that is done up tight just there. Now the next thing I'm going to do is turn the top of the spring barrel, this piece here, clockwise 180 degrees. Now I can see the slot where the woodruff key needs to go. I also know the position of the woodruff key because it's sitting at the top side of this surface here. So I'm going to push the shaft up and then move this around until it falls together. Now we've got the woodruff key in the woodruff key slot, and we'll stick on one of the nuts, this nut here, right hand thread, like that. Now that 180 degree turn that we've done has taken the spring around on the inside 180 degrees, and we should have enough preload now in that spring for the quill spring to return the quill back to its zero position where it's in at the moment. So if we turn it around, now let go, and it goes back. That has been a success. The last thing we need to do is put the second nut in position, just like that, and then lock the two nuts together. Now when I first took them off, I used small screws in these holes with a pair of pliers, but what we're going to do them up is use two Allen keys into the holes. So these Allen keys just fit into these holes, and the bottom one, you don't want it too tight, just bring it down so it just touches the surface here, and then the top nut you bring down to lock on to the bottom nut like that. It doesn't have to be too tight because it's only those two nuts that are locking together. We'll make sure that it still works, which it does. So that has the return spring and the barrel assembled to the head. Well, the high-speed head is ready to be assembled to the machine, but first we need to remove the standard vertical head. I loosen the two lock bolts, pull the head forward and lower it down to the table of the machine, and I can now carry it away. The fully assembled high-speed head is quite heavy. Because of this, I will assemble it piece by piece actually on the machine. We'll start with the base. That slides nicely into position and is locked in place by the 2 hex socket head bolts just here. 2 T-bolts are next. I wipe grease into their T slot, then slide the heads of the bolts into that slot. The head is quite heavy and must be assembled such that the 2 T-bolts come through the 2 fixing holes, one each side of the head. A washer, then a nut, goes onto each of the bolts. For this motor to work correctly with my 230-volt mains inverter, the stator coils must be connected in delta. What this means is I need 3 shorting links, and they've got to connect here, here, and just here. Onto the dovetail, just here, I slide the motor mount bracket. Into the bracket I place a motor and fit 3 mounting bolts. Now the high-speed head is back together, we need to start thinking about the electrics that powers and controls it. I've decided to mount the inverter and the switchgear on the side of the light unit just here. The light units are attached to the roof structure. They're stable and strong. I fit this piece of timber to be the mounting point. This is the inverter. It requires an interface plate to enable it to attach to the mounting point. I fit the plate just here. Take the inverter and secure it to the interface plate. The inverter is now secure. I wire the control box and mount it next to the inverter on the panel. With the inverter and the control panel in place, there's just the motor to wire. There was one last wire to go in, which I've just connected, and that was the earth lead that runs between the inverter up here, follows the mains lead back and terminates on the chassis of the motor here. So everything is earthed, everything is up to spec, and it's now ready to get going. There is one thing missing, which is a shroud that goes around the front here to protect you from the belt. That's missing, unfortunately, but I'll be addressing that a little later. But what we can do is check the motor now to see if everything works. The power comes from the mains back here. That's plugged in and switched on. The mains comes up to this box here. We have an emergency stop first. I'll undo that. Now the emergency stop's unplugged. That's applied the power to the 2 switches. I press the bottom one, which is the green. That will apply the power to the inverter. The inverter will transform it to 3-phase, which powers the motor. We hope. So let's press the green button. Boo-doo! Yay! And the motor is working. Now on this end of the inverter there's a small knob. That's the speed control. So as I increase the speed control, if I turn it in a clockwise direction, the motor increases in speed. Turn the knob in an anti-clockwise direction and the motor slows down. Which means the refurbishment of this high-speed head, which took a little bit longer than I first anticipated, is now over. And I can start doing a job. And that job will be coming up shortly, I think, in the next video. So, could you do something like this? Of course you can. And with that, this video is at an end. Take care, everybody. I'll see you next time.